So we're going to continue with the discussion of chapter 3, no self, of no self, no problem. And we're going to go into this from a number of different angles, showing how the self illusion is created and why it's so convincing. And the first argument is that we are just experts at pattern perception. So if I said something as simple as "Gee yet," and it happened to be noon and we're walking past a restaurant, you would absolutely know that what I meant to say was, "Did you eat yet?" And so you can take out all kinds of pieces of the information and we'll still make sense of it. So much so that you can just throw a bunch of random chaos up, like I was mentioning with conspiracy theories, and we'll still make some sense of it. And we fine tune this to areas of the brain. And so when it comes to certain things like faces, we know the processing center for faces, and if it gets damaged, faces no longer make sense to people. They're just chaotic, meaningless images. On the other hand, if you crank this up, sometimes we see faces everywhere. And so we've seen faces on the moon, we've seen the face on Mars. And so, this kind of pattern perception mechanism, you can turn it up, you can turn it down, and that has certain consequences. But let's just explore this notion of detective for a little bit. And let's look at the evidence, because the evidence, it's imagine we're in the courtroom, the evidence would be pretty convincing. And so right now, the experience that you're having of the world, because of the senses, it does suggest that there is something experiencing these behind the eyes, between the ears. So when we look out into the world, it feels like there's something behind the eyes experiencing this. When we talk and when we communicate, it feels like there must be a speaker behind the word spoken. Someone must be writing the speech before I speak. And in that same way, the thoughts in our head, it feels like someone must be thinking them up. So this is an old argument in philosophy, this idea that if I'm walking along the beach and I find an old watch, the first thing the mind does is it assumes, it does like that detective, it concludes based on the evidence that there must be a watchmaker. Someone made this at some point. Well, that's what's happening with our experience. The assumption is if there's thoughts, there must be a thinker. If there's words, there must be a speechwriter. And if there's someone looking out into the world, there must be someone experiencing it behind the eyes. But let me just show you an old philosophical way to refute that argument. So let's actually take it seriously and say, okay, let's conclude that based on all that evidence, there is a self. There is this kind of somewhere behind the eyes, there's this little me, and it's in the pilot's chair, and it's controlling the show, and it's writing the speech as I talk, and it's watching the screen as I look, and it's thinking the thoughts that I'm thinking. Okay, let's take that seriously. Now here's the problem. If we do take that seriously, doesn't it strongly suggest that inside that little self, wouldn't there have to be an even smaller self inside that self, who's inside that self's pilot chair, kind of taking control over that self? And wouldn't we have to again go another level and then yet another level? And you can see how this would go on, as they say, ad infinitum, just go on for infinity. And so one of the main problems with the notion of the self when we look at the evidence is that even if we take the idea of self kind of seriously, which we do on a day-to-day, this is our lives. A lot of people take the self very, very seriously. And as I mentioned in the other video, this brings all kinds of problems with it. But it doesn't stand up to even something that we could present in the courtroom. And so this idea of a little you strongly suggested there would have to be an even smaller you inside the little you, and that would go on and on and on. So that's one thing we want to ponder. And I'll come back, and I've got a lot of different ways that we can talk about the self-illusion. And I just wanted to share one more before we bring it back to the problems that the self drags along with it.